Close your eyes for a moment. I want you to imagine standing at the edge of the world, not metaphorically, literally, the southernmost point of everything we know. The wind here doesn't blow, it strikes. It hits you like a decision you can't take back. The cold isn't a temperature, it's a presence. Something that wraps itself around you and reminds you, quietly but firmly, that you are a guest here, that you have always been a guest here. The sky above Antarctica is a color that doesn't have a name in any language I know. It's not quite white, not quite gray, not quite the pale blue of early morning. It's all of those things and none of them, shifting constantly, as though the atmosphere itself is uncertain about what it wants to be. The ice beneath your boots stretches in every direction, flat, blinding, indifferent for as far as the eye can possibly see, and then further still beyond that. And yet, beneath your feet something extraordinary is waiting, not at the surface, not in the snow that crunches under your weight, not even in the first 100 meters of ice below you. No. You would have to go down, straight down, through 4 full kilometers of ancient, compressed, silent ice before you would reach it. 4 kilometers. Think about that for a moment. The height of a small mountain, inverted, a depth that swallows skyscrapers whole. A darkness so absolute and so old that it existed long before the first human ever looked up at a sky and wondered what lay beyond it. And down there in that impossible darkness, buried beneath the full weight of a continent's worth of frozen water, there are mountains, a mountain range, vast, ancient, magnificent, and until very recently, completely, utterly unknown to us. This is not a story about ice. This is a story about what we don't know, about the audacity of this planet to keep secrets from us, about the strange, humbling, quietly devastating beauty of discovery, and about what it means, what it really means, to find something that has been hiding in plain sight for millions of years, waiting patiently for someone to finally come looking. Act 1, Introduction. Grounded now. Factual but still warm. Antarctica is the 5th largest continent on Earth. It covers approximately 14 million square kilometers, larger than Europe, larger than Australia, larger than the continental United States. Roughly 98% of its surface is covered by ice, not frost, not a light dusting of winter snow, ice. Ancient, compressed, layered ice that in some places reaches a thickness of nearly 5 kilometers. We have known about Antarctica as a landmass for just over 200 years. The first confirmed sighting came in 1820, when separate expeditions, Russian, British, and American, each glimpsed its coastline within weeks of each other. As though the continent had finally decided it was ready to be seen. Before that, it existed only as a theory. Ancient Greek scholars had reasoned that a large southern landmass must exist to balance the known landmasses of the northern hemisphere. They called it Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land, and for thousands of years it remained exactly that. Even after we found it, we barely understood it. For most of modern history, Antarctica existed in the human imagination as a vast, frozen emptiness. A place of endurance and suffering, the graveyard of Scott, the triumph of Amundsen, the miracle of Shackleton. A place where men went to prove something and sometimes paid for that proof with everything they had. A place defined not by what it contained, but by its capacity to destroy. But science, as it tends to do, began to ask more patient questions. In the decades following the Second World War, researchers began deploying increasingly sophisticated tools to study the continent beneath the ice, not just on top of it. Radar systems, seismic surveys, satellite imaging, ice-penetrating sonar. And what they began to piece together, slowly, painstakingly, over the course of decades, was a portrait of a hidden world that shattered every assumption we had made about this frozen wilderness. Beneath the ice of Antarctica, there is a continent within a continent. There are valleys, There are plains. There are lakes, liquid water lakes, hundreds of them existing in permanent darkness under miles of ice, some of them larger than Lake Ontario. There are volcanic systems. There are river networks. There are ecosystems that may have been isolated from the surface world for millions of years, evolving in secret, in silence, in the dark. And there are mountains. Mountains so large, so dramatic in their scale, that had they existed anywhere else on Earth, had they risen from a temperate landscape, a tropical forest, a desert plain, they would be among the most celebrated geological features on the planet. They would have names that every schoolchild knows. They would inspire paintings, poems, pilgrimages. People would travel thousands of miles simply to stand at their base and look upward. Instead, they sit in silence, under 4 kilometers of ice, unseen, unvisited, unhurried. The range in question, the one that has drawn renewed scientific attention and wonder in recent years, lies in the interior of East Antarctica, hidden beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet, one of the most remote and inaccessible regions on the surface of our planet. The Gamburtsev subglacial mountains, as they are formally known, span roughly 1,200 kilometers. They rise to heights of up to 3,400 meters above sea level. They possess jagged, alpine peaks, deep valleys, and a geological complexity that rivals the Alps of Europe or the Rockies of North America. They are, by every reasonable measure, a major mountain range, and for all of recorded human history, we had absolutely no idea they were there. Act 2, the twist, build the tension here. Let the mystery settle in. Here is where the story becomes strange, because the Gamburtsev Mountains don't just raise questions about geography, they raise questions about time, about how the Earth works, about the very mechanisms by which our planet reshapes itself over millions and millions of years. And the deeper scientists looked, the more unsettling the mystery became. Mountain ranges, as a rule, have explanations. The Himalayas exist because the Indian tectonic plate is colliding with the Eurasian plate, a collision so slow and so powerful that it has been crumpling the Earth's crust upward for the past 50 million years. The Andes exist because the Nazca Plate is subducting beneath South America, driving magma and rock toward the surface. The Alps, the Rockies, the Atlas, every great mountain range on Earth has a story, a tectonic narrative, a reason written in the language of geology. The Gamburtsev Mountains have no such story. Or rather, they have a story that no one can fully explain. The rocks that form the Gamburtsev Range are, by current estimates, somewhere between 500 million and a billion years old. They were formed during a period called the Pan-African Orogeny, a vast mountain-building event that reshaped much of the ancient supercontinent. In geological terms, that means these mountains should not exist anymore. Mountains that old, in a region that geologically stable, should have been eroded flat hundreds of millions of years ago. The forces of wind, water, freeze and thaw, the relentless grinding patience of geological time, they should have reduced these peaks to plains long before the first dinosaur ever walked the earth. And yet there they are, preserved, pristine, their peaks still sharp and angular as though they formed not a billion years ago but yesterday. How? Why? What protected them from the forces that should have worn them smooth and buried them in their own rubble? The answer, as far as scientists can determine, is the ice itself. When Antarctica began its slow glaciation, a process that started around 34 million years ago and accelerated significantly around 14 million years ago, the growing ice sheets did something extraordinary. They entombed the mountains, sealed them, locked them inside a frozen vault that preserved their ancient forms with a fidelity that borders on the miraculous. The ice that should have destroyed them instead became their shelter. Think about that for a moment. A billion years of geological history, preserved not in spite of the ice, but because of it. The very force that makes Antarctica the most hostile and impenetrable place on Earth became, for these mountains, an act of protection, of preservation, of love almost, if we're willing to project such things onto the indifferent mechanisms of planetary physics. But the mystery doesn't end there. Because if the ice preserved the mountains, what preserved the ice? What kept the East Antarctic ice sheet stable enough, cold enough, continuous enough to serve as this billion-year vault? And what does the existence of these mountains tell us about the birth of the ice sheet itself? Scientists who have studied the Gamburtsev Range believe that the mountains may have actually been instrumental in creating the Antarctic ice sheet in the first place. The peaks were tall enough and cold enough to accumulate snow and ice even in Antarctica's warmer past. That initial glaciation in the highlands then spread slowly over millions of years until it covered the entire continent. The mountains didn't just survive the ice age, they may have started it. The mountains created the ice preserved the mountains. A loop of mutual creation stretching back across geological time, so vast it makes the entire span of human civilization look like a brief, bright spark. Act 3. Deeper revelation, quieter now. Intimate, lean in. Let me tell you something that most coverage of this discovery tends to gloss over. Something that sits at the edges of the scientific literature, hinted at rather than declared outright, because science, rightly, is cautious about the things it cannot yet prove. Beneath the Gamburtsev Mountains, there is water, not just the subglacial lakes that dot the broader Antarctic continent, though those are extraordinary enough in their own right. Beneath and around the mountains, there is a network of water, rivers almost. Channels that carry meltwater from the base of the ice sheet, flowing in darkness, flowing in silence, flowing through a landscape that no sunlight has touched in tens of millions of years. And where there is water, even in the most extreme environments our planet offers, there is often, sometimes, perhaps, possibly, life. This is not a claim that scientists make lightly. And I want to be careful here, because the boundary between hopeful speculation and legitimate scientific inquiry is one that deserves respect. But the possibility is real enough that some of the world's leading astrobiologists, the scientists who study the potential for life in extreme environments across the universe, have focused significant attention on the subglacial systems of Antarctica. Because if life can exist there, in permanent darkness, under enormous pressure, in freezing water that hasn't seen sunlight since before humans existed, then the implications extend far beyond Antarctica. They extend to Europa, the moon of Jupiter, whose subsurface ocean lies beneath a shell of ice, not entirely unlike the ice sheets of Antarctica. They extend to Enceladus, Saturn's small, brilliant moon, which vents plumes of water vapor from beneath its frozen surface. They extend to every cold, icy world in our solar system that we have quietly dismissed, because it lacks the warmth and light we instinctively associate with the conditions for life. The mountains beneath the Antarctic ice, in other words, are not just a geological curiosity, they are a laboratory. A natural experiment, running for millions of years in conditions that may mirror the hidden oceans of distant moons. The organisms that may exist in those subglacial waters, if they exist at all, would be among the most isolated life forms on Earth. Cut off from the surface world for millions of years, they would have evolved along pathways entirely their own, developing metabolic strategies, survival mechanisms, biochemical solutions to the problems of extreme cold and darkness that bear no resemblance to anything we have studied before. They would be, in the truest sense, alien, not from another world but from another time. From a chapter of Earth's history so old and so removed from our own experience that they might as well have come from the stars. We haven't found them yet, but we are looking. And the mountains are waiting. Act 4, emotional turn, direct address. Warm, human. I want to talk to you directly for a moment, not as a narrator describing a distant scientific discovery, not as a voice delivering information from behind a careful professional distance, but as one person to another, sitting with the weight of what this means. We live in an age that is often described as the age of information, the age of knowing. Everything is searchable, mappable, quantifiable. We carry devices in our pockets that can answer virtually any question we ask within seconds. We have photographed black holes. We have landed machines on Mars and Pluto and the surfaces of comets hurtling through interplanetary space. We have sequenced the human genome. We have peered back to within a fraction of a second of the Big Bang. It is easy, in such an age, to feel that the era of discovery is behind us, that the maps are complete, that the blank spaces have been filled in, that the dragons have been banished from the edges of the known world, and then something like the Gamburtsev Mountains comes along. A mountain range the size of the Alps, hiding beneath a continent, unknown to human beings for the entirety of our existence as a species, and discovered only in the last few decades through the painstaking application of technology we barely had a generation ago. Doesn't that do something to you? It does something to me. Every time I return to this story, and I have returned to it many times, I feel a very specific emotion that I find difficult to name precisely. It's not quite awe, though awe is part of it. It's not quite humility, though there's plenty of that too. It's something closer to relief, a deep, quiet exhale of relief. The world is still larger than we know. The planet we live on, the one we think we have measured and mapped and cataloged and understood, is still keeping secrets from us. Not out of malice or mystery for its own sake, but simply because it is so vast, so complex, so layered in its history, that we have not yet had the time or the tools or the luck to find everything. There are still discoveries ahead of us, still blank spaces, still dragons, and I find that strangely, profoundly, almost unbearably beautiful, because it means the story isn't over. It means the next generation of scientists, the curious child somewhere in the world right now who doesn't yet know they will dedicate their life to studying ice, still has something extraordinary waiting for them. It means the map is not complete. It means wonder is not a historical luxury but a living, present possibility. The mountains beneath the ice are a gift, not just to science, to all of us. Act 5, Facts with Meaning, pick up the rhythm. Data wrapped in story. Let me give you some numbers. Not to impress you with their size, but because sometimes numbers are the only language large enough to hold a truth. The Gamburtsev subglacial mountain range extends approximately 1,200 kilometers across the interior of East Antarctica. The highest peaks reach elevations of around 3,400 meters above sea level, comparable to the highest peaks of the Pyrenees mountain range that separates France from Spain. The range was first detected in 1958, during the International Geophysical Year, by a Soviet research team led by Grigory Gamburtsev, a geophysicist who spent his career listening to the Earth's interior through seismic waves. He died just a year later, in 1959, never having seen the full extent of what his instruments had found. There is something quietly moving about that. A man who spent his life listening for what the Earth had to say, who found mountains no human eye would ever see, and who left the world before the full magnitude of his discovery was understood. The ice above the Gamburtsev Range is, in places, more than 4 kilometers thick. If you were to stand on the surface of the East Antarctic ice sheet directly above the highest peaks, you would be standing roughly 3,400 meters above the summit, but also roughly 600 meters above sea level, because the weight of all that ice has actually depressed the underlying bedrock. pushing the entire landscape downward over millions of years. Remove the ice, and the bedrock would slowly rebound, rising over thousands of years in a process called isostatic rebound. The mountains, freed from their icy burden, would rise still higher. They are, in a sense, being held down by the very thing that has protected them. The most comprehensive mapping of the Gamburtsev Range came from an international project called AGAP, Antarctica's Gamburtsev Province, conducted between 2008 and 2009. Scientists from the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, Australia, China, and Japan flew over 9 million square kilometers of ice in specially equipped aircraft, using ice-penetrating radar, gravity sensors, and magnetic field detectors to build the most detailed portrait ever assembled of what lies beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet. What they found confirmed and exceeded every expectation. The mountains are not merely large. They are shaped by water specifically, by ancient rivers that carved valleys and gorges through the landscape long before the ice arrived. The drainage patterns etched into the bedrock tell a story of a warm, wet Antarctica, a landscape alive with flowing water, and presumably with the life that water sustains. The range has the dramatic, angular topography of mountains that were carved by glaciers, but also the older, smoother signatures of water erosion beneath them. It is a geological palimpsest, a landscape written and rewritten over billions of years, each era leaving its mark on the rock beneath. Beneath the valleys carved by those ancient rivers, sealed under the ice, there are lakes. Lake Vostok, the most famous of Antarctica's subglacial lakes, lies just to the east of the Gamburtsev Range, approximately 4 kilometers below the ice surface. It is roughly the size of Lake Ontario. It has been isolated from the surface world for somewhere between 15 and 34 million years. In 2012, Russian scientists drilled through the ice sheet and reached the lake's surface, a moment that has been compared by more than a few researchers to a moon landing. The water samples they retrieved showed signs of microbial life, organisms, living things, in a lake that had been sealed from the rest of the world since before our earliest hominid ancestors existed. The mountains at the center of it all are not just geographical features. They are the keystone of a system, a hidden, ancient, interconnected world that has been operating on its own terms, in its own darkness, entirely without our knowledge or our interference. For timescales that dwarf everything we associate with human civilization by a factor of thousands. 4 billion years of Earth history, and we have been aware of this landscape for less than 70 years. That proportion alone should stop us in our tracks. Act 6. The lighter side, breathe. Let in some warmth and wonder. I want to take a moment to step back from the geological enormity of all this and share something that I find, in its own quiet way, completely delightful. The Gamburtsev Mountains have never been visited by a human being. No expedition has reached them. No climber has stood at their summit. No flag has been planted in their snow, because there is no snow on them, of course, only 4 kilometers of ice above them and bedrock below. And the peaks exist in a darkness and a cold, and a pressure that makes human presence there essentially impossible with current technology. They are, in all likelihood, the largest mountain range on Earth that no human being has ever seen with their own eyes, and yet they are named. The individual peaks and valleys of the Gamburtsev Range have been given names by the scientists who mapped them, names assigned not from the summit, not from base camp, but from the data readouts of instruments on an airplane flying 4 kilometers overhead. Mountains named from radar returns, valleys christened in the glow of a computer screen. A landscape brought into human language and human imagination not through the sweat and cold and suffering of mountaineers, but through the patient, careful, extraordinary work of scientists peering through ice with electromagnetic waves. There is something almost playful about that, something that undercuts the solemnity of the discovery in a way that I find genuinely endearing. We are a species that names things. We cannot help it. We find a mountain we will never see, can never visit, will likely never directly experience in any sensory way, and we name it anyway. We give it a place in our language, in our maps, in our imagination. We make it ours in the only way available to us. The penguins of the Antarctic coast, meanwhile, waddle about their business entirely unaware that a mountain range exists beneath the continent they never venture far into. The Weddell seals lounge on the sea ice with their characteristic expressions of serene indifference. The skuas wheel and screech in the polar wind. Life on the surface of Antarctica continues, as it has for millennia, with no awareness of and no connection to the extraordinary hidden world beneath. I find this quietly funny. And I find it quietly beautiful, because it is a reminder that the world does not reveal itself all at once. It releases its secrets slowly, in pieces, to those with the patience and the instruments and the curiosity to ask. The mountains have been there through all of human history, through every war and empire and revolution and invention, indifferent to our existence, untroubled by our ignorance, simply waiting. Waiting perhaps for us to become ready to understand them. Closing full circle, slow down now. Powerful, return to the beginning. Come back with me now. Come back to that edge of the world. You're standing there again. The wind that strikes like a decision. The sky that has no name. The ice beneath your boots, stretching to every horizon, flat and blinding and infinite. But now you know what's underneath you. You know that 4 kilometers below the surface of this frozen desert, there are mountains, ancient, sharp-peaked, preserved as though in amber, waiting in a darkness older than memory. You know that rivers once ran through their valleys, that life may swim in the lakes at their feet, that the ice that buries them is the same ice that saved them from oblivion. You know that a Soviet scientist with a seismic receiver listened to the Earth and heard something impossible, and spent the last year of his life at the beginning of a discovery that would take decades more to fully grasp. Does the ice feel different under your boots now? I think it does. I think it has to, because knowing changes things, not always in loud, dramatic ways. Sometimes it changes things quietly, the way a key turns in a lock, a small motion, almost soundless, but one that opens something. One that makes the world a different shape than it was before you turned it. That is what discovery does. That is what the Gamburtsev Mountains do to anyone who sits with them long enough. They change the shape of the world. Not the physical world, the mountains were always there, utterly indifferent to our awareness or lack of it. But they change the shape of the world we carry inside us. The mental map we use to navigate our understanding of where we are and what this planet actually is. We tend to speak about Earth as though we have finished understanding it. As though the age of exploration is a chapter in a history book, something that happened in wooden ships with hand-drawn maps, something complete and past. And Antarctica contributes to this feeling, oddly enough, because its very hostility seems to suggest that it has already surrendered its secrets. What could possibly be hiding in a place so extreme, so inhospitable, so uniformly and brutally cold? The answer, it turns out, is everything. The mountains buried in the ice of Antarctica are a mirror. They reflect back to us something essential about the nature of knowledge, about how much we don't know, how much we cannot see, how much of the world is still folded away in dark places. Waiting for instruments we haven't built yet, waiting for questions we haven't thought to ask yet, waiting for scientists who haven't been born yet. And in that reflection, there is something more valuable than any specific piece of data. There is an invitation to stay curious, to resist the comfortable assumption that the map is complete, to keep listening to the Earth the way Grigory Gamburtsev listened to it, with patience, with instruments tuned to frequencies most people don't even know exist, with a willingness to be astonished by what comes back. The Gamburtsev Mountains have been there for 1 billion years. They were there before the first fish pulled itself onto land. They were there before the dinosaurs rose and fell. They were there before the first human being looked at a horizon and felt the pull of whatever was beyond it. They will be there, in all likelihood, for 1 billion more years, long after everything we have built and thought and loved and lost has been returned to dust and time. And under their ice, in the dark, in the silence, in the cold, something might be alive. That thought, that small, extraordinary, quietly radical thought, is what I keep coming back to. Not the geology, not the physics, not the data and the instruments and the research flights over the South Pole, but that one impossible, stubborn, beautiful possibility. That in the darkest, coldest, most remote corner of this planet, under mountains older than complex life itself, existence found a way. Life, that improbable miracle, that chemistry that became curiosity. That curiosity that eventually stood at the edge of the world in the wind and the pale, nameless light and asked, "What is down there?" Close your eyes one more time, feel the ice beneath your feet, and know that somewhere below you 1 billion years of silence is still unfolding, still waiting, still perhaps alive.